Hello and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered at the Water Cooler. I am Melissa Evers and I am a co-founder of Creneon, head of ecosystem, and I'm delighted today to have one of our advisors join us, Tom Price. We're going to go through a set of questions and get his thoughts and reflections, and I can't wait to get started. So Tom, let's just begin with you giving us a little bit of background around yourself and help the audience understand who you are and what brought you to this place.
Sure. I've spent the last 25 years working on climate full time. I used to be a reporter, and I reported from the island nation of Tuvalu, which will be the first nation in the world to cease to exist because of climate change. It's only about 5 feet above sea level. And that really radicalized me into thinking we needed to do something. And so I spent the last 25 years working on that. And it's been continually at the edge of emerging technologies and solutions, trying to find systems that scale, trying to understand what makes systems scale in a sustainable way. The challenge that we're all facing collectively right now is that the extractive industries that we've gotten so used to, oil and gas, for example, they have externalities that are not priced into the product. And we are all now collectively paying the price for those uncounted externalities. So my focus has been on technologies that are inherently sustainable, that are aligned with Earth systems so they can last and be durable for a long time. Because to an approximation, the things that survive and are durable in this world are natural systems where there is no waste. There is just fuel for something else. And so whether it was working on solar energy, utility scale solar development, or biomass to energy projects. Most recently, I started a cook stove company in East Africa, trying to get people to stop chopping down trees to make dinner. And that required operating in the global carbon markets in a very large way, because that's the other side of externalities, is that the carbon markets allow us to price positive impact in one place and take delivery for that impact somewhere else. So that's what really got me interested in what Creneon was doing. Is it's the same kind of thing, which is create an impact in one place and then monetize it or put it to work somewhere else, so long as it doesn't get wasted. Yeah. So that was what was really interesting for me about the potential here.
Awesome. So you've spent a ton of time doing large deals, as you've talked about, with infrastructure and finance, private equity. When you heard about Creneon and kind of the financialization of water to enable both positive impacts locally and globally, I'm curious if there's a corollary that you saw from your experience in the carbon markets that you think will help us be more successful, gain insight into our transformation of water.
Sure. Well, water is really unique in that it is not just a substance. I think it is a fundamental human right. And the idea of financializing a commodity like this is not without risks. This can go one of two ways. It can either be Jedi or Sith Lord. My interest was in seeing if to help do what I can to direct the project toward the light, so to speak. And the light, I think, is the opportunity to use the creation of net new clean water and the rights to that to enable more of that, right? That's what carbon credits do, is they allow you to take an impact in one place and monetize it someplace else. And so therefore be able to do more of the impact in the place where it makes a difference. Well, if we can create the marginal value that can allow otherwise financially unviable projects to take off and scale, that's incredibly powerful. And I've seen that happen already twice. Once in the renewable energy markets, when the creation of renewable energy credits, or RECs, enabled the trading of the clean energy asset, allowed that market to explode. And then most recently, in the last 6 years, in the carbon dioxide removal, or CDR market, where people are able to pay for carbon capture in one place that's taking place somewhere else, because they understand that the atmosphere that we're breathing is all one thing. So that's what's really exciting here is, can we create a market for attributes that can allow capital to flow where it can create real sustained impact that improves people's lives?
Yeah. Yep. I agree. I'm very excited about that capital unlock, and I think the energy corollary is a great example for folks who understand how renewable energy and solar and wind, exploded across our world. Is really, there's some infrastructure and financial mechanisms that were in place that really enabled that expansion, and I have every hope and expectation that that's the same type of transformation that we'll see in water as well. I think what you mentioned, though, is important to also note is the focus on regenerative water. So actually creating water, and looking at either wastewater cleanup or PFAS removal, reclaiming water or generating water, really being part of our focus, and that making real impact in the basin in which the need exists. So there's kind of a twofer with regard to the value creation, in my opinion.
Yeah, it has to be done in a way that recognizes the unique attributes of water. Many people are familiar with basically the abject failure of Thames Water in the United Kingdom to be able to deliver a reliable asset at a price that makes sense for people. In the Southwest, where I'm from, the Colorado River Basin, we're now staring down the barrel of what happens when there's not enough to go around, and when there's no clear mechanism to enable the creation or conservation of more water. Where's that money come from? So this has the potential to square that circle by bridging the gap between what someone wants to happen and where it needs to happen, decoupling the attributes from the action in a way that allows capital markets to come to play at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a couple Western markets, whether it be Thames Water here in the West Coast of the United States or in the Southwest. You've spent a ton of time investing in parts of the world that face very different infrastructure challenges. And I'm wondering if there's a firsthand experience that you'd like to share around either, seeing something and deeply understanding at a different level what it is to live in those parts of the world, or whether it's like, hey, doing business in these parts of the world is a really different animal. I think our listeners would really enjoy hearing your reflections on that.
Yeah, I have spent quite a bit of time in sub-Saharan Africa, and most recently, over the last 6 years, in Kenya. Spent a lot of time in Nairobi, Kenya. So Nairobi is this enormous, bustling metropolis with skyscrapers and businesses and billboards and go-go economy, and yet there is no garbage service, municipal garbage service in Nairobi. There's not a single inch of pipe from the power company bringing gas to people's homes for them to cook with. The electrical grid regularly fails, like on a weekly basis. There aren't sidewalks in most of the city. So just these basic pieces of infrastructure that we take for granted in terms of delivery of services that make life so much easier. The reason that life in the United States is as comfortable as it is because we invested in infrastructure projects. Like my father's from the deep South in Georgia. And if you go to the South today, you often go to people's homes and you'll find that the air conditioner's on really, really low. And it's like freezing, right? You wear a sweater indoors. And the reason is because until the 1960s in the Tennessee Valley Authority, people didn't have electricity, so they couldn't have air conditioning. And they really appreciate it. They really like it. That public infrastructure investment isn't really a part of the conversation in so many of these countries in sub-Saharan Africa, just because we benefit here from 100 years of investments in roads and power lines and distribution, and there's a lot of catching up to do. But what is exciting in those markets is the way that they have leapfrogged past us in certain ways. For example, people went from having no cell phones or no phones at all to all having cell phones. And they went from being completely unbanked to now 40% of the GDP of Kenya is done entirely through mobile app payments. China, same thing. You go into a store to buy something, you don't even have to take a card out. Your face gets scanned and then it pays. So these technological advances can move very quickly, but delivering physical services is still really hard. A friend of mine runs a solar powered desalination plant in Mombasa, Kenya. So he has solar panels. They take in salt water from the ocean. He desalinates it, makes it into clean drinking water. And then it is distributed by guys who come along with a metal cart that they load 1 ton of water on. And then they push this 1 ton cart up the hill to the street and then around the neighborhood and sell it in 20-liter jerry cans to people. And he could expand that facility if he could make just a little bit more money, but his customers can't really afford it. So here's an opportunity where if he could monetize the clean water, new net clean water generation attributes, could potentially expand his facility, serve more people, maybe lower the cost to customers, and someone somewhere else could take the credit for the new net clean water being created. That kind of impact is what's really interesting to me, is how do we connect capital markets to the places where impact needs to happen?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point that we haven't explored in other conversations on the podcast. Is that when you think about the price of water and then a credit associated with that water that's been created, there is the ability to take the sum of the value and be flexible with regard to the actual price that is implemented in the region and the value of the credit. And we've seen that in other markets where the local economy can support a certain price for an asset, and then the credit absorbs kind of a lot of the rest of the operational and maintenance costs of the infrastructure. And there's an appetite because that water is being, or that asset is being delivered in a region of the world that desperately needs it. And so the credit value actually has more value because of the uniqueness and the challenges that it is addressing. And I think that we've seen that in other markets, and part of the work that we're hoping that Crenion will deliver in various parts of the world is to replicate that model. And just as your example demonstrated, be able to enable, the credit attributes to be sold, and then your friend who owns the desalination solar installation has the capital, has the working capital to be able to actually either create other plants in other parts of the world or expand, the infrastructure within that particular region. It's this really lovely flywheel that gets going, once we are able to establish the assetification of that water and get those capital markets operating.
That is exactly what my previous company did with our cook stoves. We sold forward sold $100 million in carbon credits to a sovereign government in the European Union, and then are borrowing against that forward contract sale to do the work now to buy the stoves and build the factories and so forth that creates the carbon impact that they've paid for. So in that instance, we used the creation of a future asset to finance the work necessary to create it. And we just pulled that capital forward. And that's a really exciting opportunity, because it is so often the case that things need to get done in the market, but there just isn't a way to align things. I'm working right now on another project. California has a huge wildfire problem. And the insurance companies look, we're in the risk pricing business. We are not in the risk reduction business. Well, whose job is it to go and thin the forests of California to reduce the risk so that insurance can be affordable for people? And the answer is nobody. Sometimes we need to create new instruments or new players who can step in and fill this gap where there's an obvious donut hole in a market where everyone will benefit if it gets filled in. But until it does, no one can get across that gap. And that's what this has the potential to do. Again, it's a trade-off. We have to be sure that we don't allow the creation of situations where the financialization of an inherent right, like water, ever impedes the ability of people to access it. That is the downside risk that has to be figured out as we go to make sure that we had the experience here in California with Enron, where they traders took the right to electricity and held the state hostage, crashed our economy, crashed our grid, drove our governor from office. And, that's how markets learn and evolve. You realize, oh, okay, maybe we've over-rotated here and we need to put some restrictions in place. Similarly here, we need to be really thoughtful about when we're creating the ability to create financial instruments around something like water, and then derivatives from that it doesn't have unintended consequences.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think there's two sides of that coin. You're talking about, various types of guardrails or regulatory frameworks to ensure that, harm is not done. I think there's another piece of this, though, that we hear as we're building Crenion, and that is you don't need financialization. You don't need market. This is a regulatory, this is a policy. We just need to look to our governments and they'll fix this. And I'm curious if you have thoughts and reflections on, that opposite side of the argument and the challenges associated with relying solely on regulation.
Well, I'll give you an example. It is an analogous example, not exact, but a friend of mine who works for a very large foundation that does charitable work around the world told me that all of philanthropic capital worldwide is equal to about 1% of private equity. I mean, the fact is, we know from decades, generations of experience, that the private sector is the engine that creates growth. And we always have to keep a rein on that horse. We've all seen far too many examples where things get out of control. But it is possible. Electrification in the United States is a great example, right? It's all been done almost entirely by the private sector. Investor-owned utilities that are earning a rate of return on their capital, regulated by public utility commissions to make sure that we keep some guardrails in place so we ensure fair access to everybody. We ensure the opportunity to make some money so people want to invest in it. And we ensure that the service is safe and reliable. And those are reasonable guardrails to put in place around something that is a public good. So I think it's a really good example that we can look to when we're building markets for water that can ensure that we get the benefit of the scale and dynamism that the private sector can bring to the table without letting some of our less positive impulses run wild. As we saw in the housing market, for example, regulation isn't a bad thing, it's a required thing. And if the market is given the opportunity, it will find a way. An old mentor of mine told me a great thing. He said, capital has the ideology of a cancer cell. It only wants to grow, and it will do it just as happily clear-cutting a rainforest as it will building a solar array. Just give it some guardrails and similar incentives, and good things will happen.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, part of what you talked about with solar expansion or renewable energy expansion, some of those incentives to grow this way, not this way, where, some of like in the US, the federal tax credit for renewable energy, et cetera, that, really incentivized substantial expansion in ways that were better for the communities in which they provided energy, et cetera. And so I think there's an opportunity to look to some of those types of incentives as well. And we're seeing that around the world.
Yeah, taxes are a fantastic tool. You can use them. You can use them to punish or incentivize the kinds of behavior that you want to take place.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. So you've seen plenty of climate tech, clean tech startups and initiatives. Is there anything in particular about the Crenion team that makes you exceptionally excited or bullish about what this team brings?
I think it's a willingness to be humble and be willing to listen and be willing to evolve. When you're creating something new, you're not really sure where the sort of the edges are. It's easy in retrospect after something's already done to look and say, oh yeah, that was the form factor this should have taken. But when you're starting out, you don't know. You're just sort of feeling your way in the dark. And I've been really impressed by the team's willingness to take feedback from people, cut out things that seemed like they were going to be so core, strip the thing down and try to find the really minimum viable product that can have the impact that's intended. Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, had a great line, which was that you've designed something properly when you cannot take one more thing away from it and still have it do what it does. And I think that's what I'm seeing here is the idea started out sort of really large, creating instruments and markets and so forth. And now it's really devolving down to, can we create the minimum viable building block that can enable these transactions to take place that builds on, for example, local market regulatory policy? Why try to reinvent the wheel if there's a regulatory policy that works in Wichita? Let that be the rule that works. And if there's another one that works in Western Zambia, then let that be the one that works.
Yeah.
And let the local markets evolve as they best see fit. And I think that was a really smart way to design this so that it can scale with whatever the local conditions are.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been several pivots so far, as we had a mindset and then we're like, no, this would be a better way to go. This either scales better or is lower cost or is much more efficient or a faster path to market or what or. I think that's absolutely true. That's not to say we don't have ambition. There are all kinds of other business models and opportunities that we see sitting around, the core product. But we absolutely want to get this right and enable global scale to drive the impact that we believe is possible. I think that's very fair. So when you think about your Crenion 5-10 years out, your vision of the future, how has the existence of Crenion changed the world that we know?
As someone who's worked on climate change for a long time, full time, I'm uncomfortably aware of the degree to which our natural systems are under stress, and that we're going to need to create new ones and greater resilience. My sincere hope is that Crenion can help build the infrastructure to make rational the creation of net new water from places where we can't currently get it, whether it's atmospheric capture or desalination or recovering from wastewater, because we've seen too many terrifying stories in recent years of municipalities getting really, really close to running dry. And I don't want to contemplate what's going to happen when a large city just has its water system fail.
Yeah.
And municipalities, governments often can't respond at the speed and scale necessary for these crises. The private sector, I think, can find a way to build more capacity into the system, and this tradability of rights, I think, could be a really big part of that. So that's what I'm excited to see develop.
Yeah, me too. Your comment about risk reduction and this other project that you're working on, I think is one of the things that in the conversations that we've had with municipalities, even in places where they have water supply, like I think about here in Portland, Oregon, where we're kind of literally swimming in water, um, there is not a lot of resiliency, at least in some of the conversations that we've had with municipalities broadly. They might have water right now, but they recognize that like we are a forest fire away or a natural disaster away from having a major crisis that wipes out the water supply for our particular municipality. And I think that's another area where water infrastructure build out can really provide that risk reduction, because as you mentioned, private markets are really good at being able to locate those opportunities. And whether it be like, hey, I'm going to build this infrastructure and I'm going to sell these forwards to industrials, but I'm also going to sell you a contract if these conditions exist. If natural disasters occur, this is how we can supply water for your municipality, et cetera. There's just all kinds of financial instruments and ways in which we can manage not only the supply, but the risk inherent for our populations that I think is also a really exciting element of our future that Cranion can help provide.
Think about this, Melissa. It has only been, for all of human existence, the last 100 years that humans have had the ability to have reliable access to electricity, light, heat, clean water, clean air on demand.
Mm.
We don't have the muscle memory for what it's like to not have it. And unlike many parts of the developing world, which struggle to get by and provide some of those things where people get used to it, we in the United States are completely unprepared for what will happen when, for example, Canada burns and the air is bad in New England, or there's a drought and the hydropower isn't provided, or any number of disruptions, which are 100% going to happen because of climate change, because of the unpriced externalities that we talked about at the beginning with the fossil fuel industry. And so the best time to do this would have been 20 years ago. Next best time is right now. And so we're doing it right now, and the need couldn't be more urgent.
I can't think of a better way to end our podcast. Thank you so much.
This is why I don't get invited to parties, because this is what
Oh, I've had a drink with you. I think you're just fine at parties. We will conclude our chat right now, but thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll see you at the next episode. Take care. Bye.
Great to see you, Melissa.